Control your child, or I'll call security." Then came the slap. Sharp. Loud. Unmistakable. The flight attendant's palm met Danielle Carter's face with such force that baby Amani, only 5 months old, jerked in her arms and began to scream. The first-class cabin went silent, then phones came out. Some passengers recorded with smug satisfaction, assuming they just witnessed a disruptive passenger finally put in her place. But Danielle didn't scream. She didn't curse. She didn't even cry. She simply adjusted her daughter's blanket, lifted her chin, and turned back toward the window. A single drop of blood ran from the corner of her lip. Her hands trembled, but her eyes, those steady, dark, powerful eyes, never flinched. Danielle Carter, 34 years old, was not just any mother traveling with an infant. She was the co-founder of Atlas Aerotech, one of the fastest-growing private aviation companies in America. But no one in that cabin knew that. Not yet. What they saw was a black woman with a baby, sitting in first class, alone. And that was enough for assumptions to flourish. The flight attendant, Karen Mills, straightened her Navy uniform, flipped her blonde bob back over her shoulder, and announced to the cabin, "Some people don't understand how to behave on airplanes." Danielle checked her watch. 3 minutes past boarding time. Then she glanced down at her phone, a message blinking across the screen. Board vote moved up. 30 minutes. Be ready. She took a deep breath. Not yet. Not now. If you've ever watched a situation unfold and wondered how far people would go when they think no one is watching, this is that story. If you've ever been judged before you had a chance to speak, this is your moment to remember. Because what happened next didn't just change a flight. It changed an entire industry. This is a black story worth telling. And if it moves you, even just a little, share it. Hit that subscribe button for more true stories that remind us what happens when quiet power stands up to loud ignorance. Now breathe in, and keep watching. This story is just beginning. Danielle Carter had always known how the world saw her before she ever opened her mouth. To most people on that plane, she was just another young black mother trying to hustle her way into first class, probably on a buddy pass, maybe with someone else's credit card. She wore no designer logos, no flashy jewelry, just a sleek black jumpsuit, white sneakers, and a carry-on with a baby bottle tucked in the side pocket. But there was something about her presence, even in silence, that unsettled the room. She didn't carry herself like a victim. She didn't act like someone waiting for permission. Danielle Carter moved like someone used to having the floor, and when necessary, the final word. She was 34. Born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. Former Air Force engineer. Harvard MBA. Currently Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder of Atlas Aerotech, a rising force in the aerospace industry. She'd spent the last 6 years helping build an aviation empire from the ground up alongside her husband, Jordan Carter. But when she flew, she rarely used her married name. Not because she was ashamed. Quite the opposite. Danielle understood the power of being underestimated. She understood how different the service felt when crew members thought she was just another woman in 2B, not someone who sat on the board of directors. She wanted to see what everyday families faced. She wanted to know how policies played out for real people, not just executives in suits. Which is why, on that morning flight from Los Angeles to New York, she'd boarded under her maiden name. No title. No red flags. Just Danielle. Except there was one small detail that could have given her away, her watch. It was simple. A black leather strap. Understated. But engraved on the underside were the words, "To my warrior, T." A gift from Jordan on the day they signed their first government contract, sealing their place as the youngest black couple in aviation history to launch a commercial aerospace venture. She wore that watch like armor. Quiet. Powerful. Not to show off, but to remember. And now, sitting in first class with her baby crying and her cheek still stinging, Danielle Carter knew something else too. This was no longer about comfort. This was no longer about boarding passes or seating charts. This was about something bigger. This was a moment the world needed to see. It wasn't the first time Danielle Carter had been judged before speaking. Not the first time someone saw her skin, her curls, her confidence, and decided she must be out of place. But there was something about the way this flight attendant, Karen Mills, moved that told Danielle this wasn't about a crying baby. It wasn't even about airline protocol. It was about control. Karen's smile was tight, performative. Her tone hit every syllable like a warning bell. Some passengers, she'd said earlier to another crew member within earshot, just don't know how to act in first class. Danielle heard it. So did the elderly man across the aisle. So did the teenage girl recording on her phone. And yet no one said a word. Because deep down, everyone knew exactly who some passengers meant. You didn't need to say, "you people," out loud for it to echo through the cabin. The phrase lived in the pauses, in the stares, in the questions no one asked, but everyone thought. Where's the father? Why is she traveling alone? Is she even supposed to be here? Danielle had learned to recognize it early in life. In school, at job interviews, in boardrooms where she was the only black woman in the room. She saw it now, in the way Karen hovered too close, in the way the businessman 2 rows back rolled his eyes every time baby Imani whimpered. It was the slow drip of dismissal, the kind that eroded dignity one moment at a time. And yet, it wasn't just Karen. Several passengers nodded in quiet agreement when Karen called security. One woman even muttered, "Finally," as if Danielle had committed some crime by rocking a fussy infant mid-flight. The irony was painful. Danielle had helped write the passenger comfort policy for Atlas Aerotech. She knew exactly what rights she had, what protections she was supposed to be afforded. But policies on paper meant nothing when prejudice spoke louder than procedures. And the worst part? Danielle wasn't shocked. Just tired. Tired of being the one who had to stay calm. Tired of choosing grace over fury. Tired of walking into rooms she helped build, only to be treated like an intruder. This wasn't about noise. It was about noise coming from the wrong person. Danielle Carter understood that truth better than anyone on that plane. And now the world was about to understand it, too. Karen Mills reached for her radio like it was a badge of honor. "Code red," she said clearly, pressing the button as if the plane were under siege. "Uncooperative passenger in 1A. Infant out of control. Requesting ground security assistance." The words echoed through the cabin like a fire alarm. Passengers stirred. Some gasped. A few looked around with awkward discomfort. But most, surprisingly, didn't question it. Because when someone in a uniform says there's a problem, people tend to believe them, especially when the problem looks like Danielle Carter. A teenage boy 2 rows back whispered, "Damn, she must have done something serious." An influencer across the aisle opened her TikTok live and whispered into the camera, "Black mom causing drama in first class. Y'all, this is wild. Stay tuned." Within seconds, the viewer count ticked upward, 5,000, then 8,200, then 12,000. Danielle, meanwhile, didn't flinch. She rocked baby Imani gently, whispering soft words only the child could hear. Her phone buzzed in her lap. A message from Jordan. 5 words, "Board vote moved to today." Her breath caught. She had planned for this meeting. Not now. Not like this. She quickly texted back, "I'll be ready." Across the cabin, Karen made a show of speaking into her radio again. "Passenger is delaying departure." She's combative, refusing crew instructions. Recommending immediate removal. Danielle's calm became unsettling to some. It didn't match the narrative Karen was building. People expected shouting. They expected tears. Maybe even a meltdown. But Danielle offered none of that. Just silence, dignity, and one steady gaze that swept the room like a quiet storm. The businessman behind her leaned forward, voice low but sharp. "Ma'am, some of us have connections to make. If you could just cooperate." Danielle turned to face him slowly. "I am cooperating," she said calmly. I'm sitting in the seat I paid for. He sneered. Yeah, well, people like you always think the rules don't apply. That phrase again. People like you. Danielle glanced down at her phone once more. This time, she didn't respond. Because she knew exactly what time it was. Not on the clock, but in the moment. It was almost time for the world to see who she really was. Not the woman Karen assumed she was. Not the stereotype the passengers chose to believe. But the reason every person on that flight was about to become part of history. The cabin door was still open. The clock was ticking. 12 minutes until departure. Karen stood near the galley, arms crossed, watching Danielle like a hawk. Her voice rang out once more, louder this time. Ma'am, you're delaying this flight. Final warning. Gather your belongings or we'll remove you. Danielle didn't move. She kept her eyes on baby Imani, who had finally calmed, her tiny fist resting on her mother's collarbone. The child's peaceful breathing felt like an anchor in the chaos. But peace was not what Karen wanted. Not today. One of the gate agents appeared at the cabin door with 2 airport security officers in tow. Heavy boots. Dark uniforms. Radios clipped to their shoulders. Their expressions said they'd been called for something serious. The businessman behind Danielle took out his phone and began filming again, whispering, "They're finally gonna drag her out." Danielle heard it all. She didn't flinch. But the tension around her grew like a storm ready to break. The older man across the aisle muttered, "If she had any class, she would have just apologized and moved." Danielle's grip on her phone tightened. Karen turned to the security officers. "She's non-compliant. We followed all airline procedures. She's being aggressive and refuses to leave." One of the officers stepped forward, hand resting near his taser. Danielle slowly lifted her gaze. "May I speak?" she asked quietly. Karen snapped. "Now you want to talk?" Danielle ignored her. She opened her phone, tapped a code, and held the screen face down in her lap. The officer hesitated. "Ma'am, we need you to stand. Please comply, or we'll assist you physically." The moment hovered, thin as glass, heavy as thunder. Danielle's voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. Instead, it settled deep in the cabin like a weight no one saw coming. "I suggest," she said, locking eyes with the officer, "that you verify who you're about to put your hands on." The younger officer looked confused. The older one frowned, clearly uncomfortable now. Karen scoffed. "Oh please. What, you gonna pull the 'do you know who I am' card?" Danielle didn't answer. She just tapped once more on her screen, then raised her eyes to the front of the plane. It wasn't a threat. It was a signal. And the response was already in motion. Danielle lifted her phone with one hand, steady as ever. She pressed the call button. The screen lit up, the name glowing clearly. Jordan Carter. She tapped video call, then slowly rotated the phone until the front camera faced forward, capturing the flight attendant, the security officers, the gawking passengers, and the full theater of judgment surrounding her. "Hey babe," she said into the speaker, her voice calm, measured, resolute. "I'm having a bit of a situation. On your airline." There was a pause on the other end. A silence so sharp you could hear every breath in the cabin. Then came the voice. Authoritative. Familiar. Impossible to ignore. "Which aircraft, sweetheart?" Danielle kept the phone held steady as she replied, "Atlas Aerotech Flight 719. First class cabin. They're trying to remove me." The silence that followed was not quiet. It was electric. Passengers shifted in their seats. Karen's confident stance faltered. The security officers glanced at each other, uncertain. And the businessman behind Danielle, still recording, lowered his phone a few inches without realizing it. Jordan Carter's voice returned, this time more direct, more commanding. "Put me on speaker." Danielle obliged, setting the phone gently on the armrest. His voice filled the cabin like thunder rolling in over an open field. "This is Jordan Carter, CEO of Atlas Aerotech. I need everyone near my wife to step back immediately. Karen's jaw dropped. The businessman cursed under his breath. No way. The security officers froze. One even took a step back without being told. The younger one looked genuinely embarrassed now. The passengers who had been filming just seconds before suddenly weren't sure where to point their cameras. Some were still recording. Most just stared. Jordan's voice stayed calm, but it cut through the tension like a scalpel. Miss Mills, flight crew, and any airport personnel involved, I'll be reviewing this incident personally. Danielle reached down, picked up baby Imani, and stood. Not in defiance. Not in anger. But in quiet control. Because the moment she said his name, the story changed. She was no longer the woman in 1A with a fussy baby. She was the wife of the man who built the very airline they were all sitting on. And this time, the whole plane was watching. The shift in the room was immediate. You could feel it in the stillness. The same passengers who had smirked, rolled their eyes, whispered judgments. They weren't so sure anymore. Some lowered their phones. Some just sat frozen. A few quickly opened Google, typing Jordan Carter Atlas Aerotech CEO into their browsers. His name wasn't just a title. It carried weight. Headlines. Contracts. Power. The young woman live streaming on TikTok whispered to her audience, "Yeah, this is not just some random mom. She's married to the CEO." Her viewer count doubled in minutes. 20,000. Then 28. Screens lit up across the cabin as notifications exploded. Hashtag Atlas Airline Drama. Hashtag CEO Twist. The security officers stepped back without a word, their shoulders tense, eyes shifting toward the open cabin door. Karen Mills, still holding on to the edge of her authority, tried one last desperate move. She reached for her radio. "Captain, we need clarification. Passenger claims personal connection to executive." Before she could finish, Danielle held her phone up again and quietly said, "He's not a connection. He's my husband." Jordan's voice came back on speaker, low and final. "This flight is grounded until further notice. The situation is being handled by executive authority." The captain's voice, now heard faintly over the intercom, confirmed it seconds later. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been instructed to delay departure. Please remain seated." Danielle didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice or demand apologies. She simply sat back down, gently rocking Imani, who had drifted back to sleep in her arms. The very presence that had made others uncomfortable, her quiet strength, her unwavering calm, was now the thing commanding the entire aircraft. A few rows behind her, the same businessman who had criticized her now pulled his cap down to hide his face. The elderly woman who had tooted at Imani's cries earlier whispered to her seatmate, "Well, that explains a lot." Danielle didn't respond to any of it. She had no interest in their sudden change of tone. Respect that came only after exposure wasn't respect at all, it was fear disguised as civility. But she wasn't here to teach that lesson. Not today. Today, she was here to remind them of something else. That dignity doesn't need to yell to be heard. Sometimes, it just needs the truth, and the right moment to speak it. Danielle Carter didn't need to raise her voice. Her power didn't come from volume. It came from clarity, from knowing who she was, and who she didn't need to prove anything to. She reached into her bag with one hand and carefully pulled out a thin leather wallet. Tucked inside, behind her ID and boarding pass, was a small, metallic card, matte black with gold lettering. She held it up, tilted slightly so the cabin lights caught the name. Danielle Carter, founding partner, Atlas Aerotech. No fanfare. No explanation. Just facts. Passengers leaned forward to get a better look. Some gasped. A few phones resumed filming, this time with a very different caption in mind. Karen's eyes locked on the card. For a moment, she didn't breathe. Then she stumbled backward, nearly hitting the beverage cart behind her. "That's not possible," she muttered, barely audible. I would have known. Danielle looked her dead in the eye. Why? Because you assume women like me don't build things? Don't sit at the table? Or maybe you just didn't think a black woman holding a baby in seat 1A could also be the woman who signs your check. Her tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. It settled like truth does. Quiet, weighty, undeniable. Across the cabin, someone whispered, "She's the one who helped design this jet." Another passenger whispered back, "She owns the airline." Danielle placed the card down beside her phone, screen still glowing with a paused video call from Jordan. The image of her husband, composed and watching everything unfold, sat as a silent witness to every word, every look, every choice made before the truth came out. "I fly like this often," she said, addressing no one and everyone all at once. "Under my name. No titles. No heads up to the crew. Not because I want to be treated differently, but because I want to see who gets treated how and why." She paused. "And today, y'all gave me quite the show." It wasn't sarcasm. It was accountability wrapped in poise. And now, there was no going back. Not for the crew. Not for the passengers. Not for the company. Danielle Carter wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was the mirror. And every person on that plane had just seen their reflection. Karen Mills stood frozen near the galley, her face pale, her posture stiff like a soldier waiting for judgment. She had gone from being the loudest voice in the cabin to the quietest in less than 5 minutes. The confidence she wore like a uniform had slipped off the moment she realized who Danielle truly was. Danielle didn't gloat. She didn't look for revenge. But when she spoke again, it cut through the cabin with the same precision as a captain's command. "Miss Mills," she said, calm and deliberate, "I'd like you to explain, clearly and in front of everyone, why you struck me while I was holding my child." Karen opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Danielle waited. Still nothing. So she continued, not out of anger, but out of necessity. "Because you see, we both know there is no training manual that tells you to raise your hand to a passenger. There is no safety protocol that allows a slap as a response to crying. And there is certainly no regulation that excuses it just because the passenger is a black woman with a baby." The air in the cabin felt thinner, heavier. No one moved. Jordan's voice came through the speaker again, direct as ever. "Karen Mills, you are suspended effective immediately. An internal investigation will begin today, and federal authorities have already been notified of the incident. Do not speak to the passenger again. Do not move near her. Remain seated until escorted off this aircraft." Karen tried to say something, anything, but what came out wasn't explanation. It was desperation. "I didn't know who she was," she whispered. "I was just trying to keep control." Danielle looked her dead in the eye. "That's the problem, Karen. You thought you needed to control me." A pause. "You didn't need to know who I was to treat me with dignity. You just needed to know I was human." That truth landed like a gavel. Across the aisle, the elderly woman who had clapped earlier now looked down at her hands. The businessman pulled his cap lower. No one made eye contact. Because deep down, they all knew this wasn't just Karen's failure. It was a reflection of something bigger. Something many had let slide for far too long. And now, for the first time, it was being held to account. Danielle remained seated, still rocking Imani, who was now fast asleep, completely unaware of the fire her mother had just walked through with grace. She didn't need applause. She didn't want pity. What she needed, and what she came for, was clarity. Because this wasn't about one flight, one slap, or one flight attendant. It was about a pattern. Danielle looked out over the first-class cabin, her voice low but steady. "This isn't new," she said. "This isn't rare. This is what happens every day, just not always in front of a camera." A few heads lowered. Others shifted uncomfortably. She continued. "I've flown under my own name for years, watching, listening. No special alerts to the crew. No VIP status. I wanted to see how real people, especially women of color, mothers, solo travelers, are treated. She paused, eyes sweeping the cabin. And what I found was consistency. Not in service, but in assumptions. In the way questions are asked. In the way patience disappears faster when skin color enters the equation. No one interrupted. Not even Karen. Danielle tapped her phone screen again. This time, she connected to a conference room livestream back at Atlas Aerotech headquarters. A team of executives, all dressed in dark suits, appeared on screen. Boardroom, meet the flight crew. Crew, meet the people responsible for changing the way this company operates, starting today. Jordan stepped into frame beside the executives. He spoke with calm authority. As of this moment, Atlas Aerotech is implementing the Safe Skies initiative. Every crew member, gate agent, and security staffer will undergo bias response training. Every incident of customer mistreatment will be reviewed by an independent panel. We will no longer wait for public outrage to hold people accountable. Danielle looked back at the passengers. There's no going back to business as usual, she said. Because if it takes wealth or a title for someone like me to be treated with basic respect, then that's not service, it's selective dignity. And we're not building an airline like that. A hush fell over the cabin. Not out of shame. Out of realization. They hadn't just witnessed a confrontation. They had seen a turning point. The beginning of a new standard, where power wasn't used to punish, but to protect. And no one on that flight would forget the woman who made it happen. When the cabin lights dimmed slightly to signal delay, no one complained. No one asked for compensation. No one grumbled about missed connections. Because what had just unfolded wasn't a travel delay. It was a reckoning. Across the aisle, the young woman who had been live streaming earlier set her phone down. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve, not from sadness, but from the weight of realization. Her voice cracked as she spoke to the camera one last time. I thought I was capturing drama, she said. Turns out, I was capturing truth. And I was part of the problem. The comments flooded in. Same here. I judged her too. I didn't speak up when I should have. It wasn't just a plane full of passengers watching Danielle Carter. It was an entire country. Because something about seeing a calm, dignified black woman hold her baby while being humiliated, and never once lose her composure, touched something deeper. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She didn't try to prove her worth. And that, in itself, exposed everything. Because the way she was treated had nothing to do with her behavior, and everything to do with who people assumed she was. It wasn't about noise. It was about presence. And for far too long, presence alone had been perceived as a threat. Danielle didn't just challenge that. She shattered it. One of the passengers, a middle-aged man who had remained quiet the entire flight, stood and approached her with cautious sincerity. I judged you, he said, voice low. I saw a woman with a crying baby and assumed the worst. But I saw you today, and I'll never forget it. Danielle nodded politely. Not out of forgiveness. Not even out of validation. But because she understood something he was just learning. Sometimes, the most powerful lesson isn't in proving people wrong. It's in letting them see how wrong they already were. That flight became more than a route from Los Angeles to New York. It became a mirror. And every passenger, every viewer, every employee watching had to answer one question. What do I see when I look at someone who doesn't look like me? Because the answer to that changes everything. And on that flight, for the first time, thousands of people saw clearly. Not just who Danielle Carter was, but who they were, too. Danielle Carter didn't walk off that plane to applause. She didn't need it. She walked off holding Imani close, stepping into the terminal with the same quiet dignity she had carried onto the aircraft. No announcement. No fanfare. Just a mother, calm, composed, and stronger than ever. The airline offered to rebook her on a private jet. She declined. She wanted to finish the journey her way, on her terms. Because it was never about luxury. It was about truth. Back at Atlas Aerotech headquarters, Jordan Carter met her with open arms, his eyes filled with something deeper than pride. Respect. Admiration. Love rooted not in her title, but in her integrity. "Still want me to join that board meeting?" she asked with a half-smile. He laughed. "No need. You just chaired the most important one of your life." Within hours, the story went viral. But not just because of the scandal. Because of the stillness. The composure. The mirror Danielle had held up for everyone to see. Within days, airlines across the country announced internal reviews. Within weeks, new protocols were in place. Atlas Aerotech's Safe Skies initiative became an industry model, cited in training programs and leadership seminars. And Danielle? She didn't ask for the spotlight. But she didn't run from it either. She used it. She launched a foundation, Dignity in Motion, focused on equity in travel and service industries. She funded free legal aid for travelers facing discrimination. She worked with regulators to establish national accountability standards for customer-facing roles. Because she knew real change doesn't happen in viral moments. It happens in consistent ones. And the most important thing she did was simple. She made people look. Look at their assumptions. Look at their silence. Look at the systems they participate in every day without even realizing it. Danielle's message wasn't wrapped in outrage. It was delivered in presence. So here's the practical truth. You don't have to be a CEO's wife to deserve dignity. You don't need a title to demand respect. But if you do have a platform, a position, or power, use it. Not to protect yourself, but to protect the next person who won't have that kind of backup when the moment comes. Because the world doesn't need more heroes. It needs more accountability. So now, let's bring it back to you. Have you ever been misjudged before you had a chance to speak? Have you ever watched someone else be mistreated and stayed silent? Today is your moment. Not just to feel something, but to do something. If this black story resonated with you, if Danielle's quiet strength made you pause, share this story. With someone who needs to hear it. With someone who's been there. With someone who's never had to be. Subscribe to Hidden Worth for more true stories that amplify our voice, our power, and our truth. Because change doesn't start loud. It starts clear. And you just heard it.